She found him bleeding on her porch mud on his boots. No name, barely conscious. While the rest of the town mocked her for taking in a stranger, she fed him, tended to his wounds, and shielded him from rumors. But something about the way he watched the hospital's lights across the valley at night felt too knowing, too quiet. Who exactly had she let into her home, and why did everyone seem just a little too afraid of the man who said nothing? If this story stirs a quiet ache or curiosity in you, stay a while. And if you feel like it, subscribe, or leave a thought. It's the little moments that keep these stories breathing. The sky above Lone Pine Ranch in Cedar Creek, Montana, grew darker by the minute, clouds gathering like wool soaked in ink. Emily Harper moved quickly through the rising wind, her boots sinking deep into the rain-softened earth, struggling against mud that gripped like quicksand. She felt an urgency she couldn't shake, trying to corral the horses into their stalls before the storm hit full force. The animals snorted nervously, sensing the storm's approach as clearly as she did, their dark eyes wide and wary, hooves shifting restlessly. Rain began to fall in earnest, heavy drops striking Emily's skin like tiny stones. She brushed strands of wet hair away from her face, squinting into the distance. Thunder growled, low and ominous, rattling her bones. In that moment, a flash of lightning illuminated the edge of the property near the entrance gate, and something caught her eye, something oddly shaped, unmoving, like a fallen branch. But instinctively, she knew better. Emily's heart tightened in her chest, breath catching in her throat. She moved swiftly toward it, each step sending muddy water splashing around her ankles, soaking her jeans. As she drew closer, another flash of lightning lit up the figure. Clearly it was a man, lying face down in the mud, soaked and completely still. "Dear God," Emily whispered, adrenaline driving her forward. Kneeling at his side, she quickly rolled him onto his back, checking for a pulse. It was there, faint, uneven, but unmistakably present. Relief flooded through her, brief and sharp, replaced immediately by the urgency to get him inside. The storm grew stronger, rain hammering down with force, water cascading from her face as she lifted his head from the muddy ground. "Can you hear me?" she called through the thunder's roar, but there was no response. The stranger's breathing was shallow and strained, his chest rising and falling weakly beneath a soaked denim jacket. Emily didn't recognize him, his face rugged but unfamiliar, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. She paused, uncertainty flickering within her, before deciding there wasn't time for questions, summoning all her strength. Emily slid her arm under his shoulders, pulling him upright. The man groaned weakly, head rolling back against her shoulder, completely limp. His weight was heavier than she expected, muscles slack, his body cold and drenched from lying in the mud. Gritting her teeth, she dragged him toward the barn, feet slipping in the treacherous ground. Each step required immense effort, the mud pulling back against her like hands determined to slow her down. But Emily persisted, determined to get him to shelter. She finally reached the barn door, kicking it open and stumbling inside, panting heavily from exertion. Rain battered the roof, a relentless drumming sound filling the air. She eased the stranger onto the worn cot reserved for injured ranch hands, quickly fetching towels and blankets from a nearby shelf. Gently, she wiped the mud and rain from his face, revealing more clearly the strong lines etched by time and hardship. She noticed his rough, calloused hands, evidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime working outdoors, just as she had. Emily felt an unexpected wave of empathy toward him, a connection to the unknown trials that had brought him here. As she dried his face, his eyelids fluttered briefly, eyes flickering open just long enough for their gazes to meet. They were deep blue, weary, and filled with confusion. He mumbled something unintelligible before slipping back into unconsciousness. Emily's heart quickened, concern mingled with curiosity. Who was he? How had he ended up alone, injured and unconscious, on her ranch? She stood quietly for a moment, watching the rise and fall of his chest beneath the blanket, a strange calm settling over her despite the storm outside. But that calm shattered instantly when headlights suddenly flashed through gaps in the barn walls, bright and piercing, slicing through the darkness. Emily froze, panic tightening in her chest as the sound of an approaching vehicle grew louder, then stopped abruptly near the barn. She quickly blew out the single lantern, illuminating the barn, plunging them into shadow, praying whoever it was would leave quickly. Voices reached her ears, muffled by the pounding rain but unmistakably angry, sharp with impatience. She crept toward the barn's wooden slats, peering cautiously through a narrow crack, heart pounding. A large black pickup truck idled nearby, 4 men stepping into the downpour. Their features were difficult to make out clearly, but their body language tense, aggressive, made it clear they weren't here to help. One man shouted above the storm, words indistinct, but filled with menace, gesturing toward the path Emily had just taken to drag the stranger inside. Another held a flashlight, sweeping its beam across the muddy yard. Emily held her breath, willing them to leave, to vanish back into the storm. But they remained, pacing angrily, searching, turning back to the unconscious man. Her heart hammered painfully. Was he in trouble? Had he done something wrong? Or was he merely a victim, hunted unjustly? The questions raced through her mind, no easy answers coming. All she knew for certain was she couldn't turn him over to these men, not until she knew the truth. With determination, Emily moved silently back to the stranger's side, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Whoever you are," she whispered softly, "I won't let them hurt you. You're safe here." She took a slow breath, steadying herself, knowing that this decision would have consequences. She lived quietly on Lone Pine Ranch for years, her routine predictable, her life comfortably isolated. But now, with the arrival of this stranger and the dangerous men hunting him, everything had changed in an instant. There would be no returning to normalcy, no simple explanation. Yet, deep within her, Emily felt no regret, only a quiet, steadfast resolve to protect someone vulnerable, someone who clearly needed help. Outside, voices continued, angry and insistent. Emily stood near the cot, watching her patient carefully, aware that his fate, and perhaps hers, hung delicately in the balance. She knew instinctively that the quiet peace of Lone Pine Ranch had been shattered, replaced now by uncertainty, danger, and a hidden truth waiting to unfold. She glanced again through the gaps in the barn, seeing the men move closer, their flashlight beams cutting sharply through the darkness. They were determined, relentless, and clearly wouldn't stop until they found who they sought. Emily knew her moment of choice had come. She could stay hidden, silent, and safe, or step forward to face whatever storm awaited. But as she stood there, listening to the rain hammering the roof, watching the unconscious stranger breathing quietly beside her, Emily Harper knew without question that she had already made her choice. She wouldn't back down, wouldn't betray this unknown man who now depended on her kindness, protection, and courage. As lightning flashed once more, illuminating the barn briefly, Emily straightened her shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. She didn't look back toward the door, but deep in her heart, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. Emily crouched in the darkness of the barn, one hand still resting on the man's shoulder, the other reaching to silently snuff out the lantern's small flame. Shadows swallowed the space instantly. Outside, the rain thickened, pelting the tin roof like stones on sheet metal. Her breath came shallow, her body pressed against the wall as she listened. Tires crunched over gravel, then stopped. A truck door slammed, then another. 4, maybe 5 voices shouted over the storm, sharp and full of frustration. One of them kicked something metal, clanging against wet ground. The tension in their words didn't sound like concern for a missing friend. These men weren't searching with compassion. They were hunting. From the barn's narrow window slit, she glimpsed them under the headlights, burly figures in soaked flannel, one with a flashlight scanning the pasture, another gesturing wildly toward the dirt road. They looked like men who didn't wait for explanations. Emily's jaw tightened. She'd seen this kind of energy before, men who believed the world owed them obedience, men who didn't like hearing the word no. She turned back toward the cot. The man lay still, his clothes drying slowly under a thin wool blanket. His face was calmer now, though his breathing remained uneven. She leaned in, brushing damp strands of hair from his brow. Suddenly, his eyes blinked open, blue, sharp, and startled. His lips parted as if to speak, but only a whisper emerged. "Don't let them find me." Emily leaned closer. "I won't," she murmured, her voice steady, quieter than the storm outside. He closed his eyes again, and for a moment she thought he'd slipped away. But then he drew a shaky breath, and his fingers moved slightly beneath the blanket. He was still with her. The men's voices grew louder. Boots stomped on the porch. One of them banged on the main door to the ranch house, shouting into the storm. Emily swallowed hard. Her heart pounded against her ribs, and every part of her urged her to lock the barn door, to hide, to pretend she hadn't seen anything. But she couldn't, not anymore. She moved toward the barn entrance, her boots silent on the old wooden floor. Just beyond the door, one of the men broke away from the others, stepping toward the barn, flashlight sweeping back and forth across the darkened yard. The beam passed over the barn wall, then circled back. Emily froze. The man called out, voice low but menacing. "You sure he came this way? I swear I saw something near the gate." Another voice answered, annoyed. "That rancher woman, she lives alone. If she's seen him, she'll talk. If not, we keep looking." Emily's hands balled into fists. She had no intention of talking. Her entire life had been built on self-reliance, on holding the line when others pushed. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to make her feel powerless, and it wouldn't be the last. But this time, it wasn't just her life at stake. A loud clap of thunder shook the barn. The flashlight beam moved away, distracted by something near the stable. She used the moment to slip back to the cot, kneeling beside the stranger. "You're safe for now," she whispered, "but I need to know, who are they? Why are they after you?" He didn't respond. She leaned in closer, about to ask again, when he reached up and gripped her wrist weakly, but enough to startle her. His eyes opened again. This time, they held focus, fear, but also something steadier, a request, unspoken. "Just wait," he whispered, voice gravelly. "Please, don't trust anyone." Emily held his gaze, nodding slowly. "I won't," she said. "I just need to know what I'm waiting for." He didn't answer, but the grip on her wrist remained a moment longer before it loosened and fell away. Outside, the engine of the truck rumbled again. A voice barked orders, short, angry, then silence. The crunch of tires moving in the gravel returned, this time retreating. She waited, breath held, until the sound disappeared into the storm. Inside the barn, only the rain spoke now, softer than before. She stayed crouched beside the cot, unsure whether she'd just protected an innocent man or harbored a fugitive. But something in her gut, something hard-earned and old, told her he didn't deserve to be left out there in the rain. Emily pulled the blanket higher up to his chest, then stood. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the lantern again. She didn't light it. She didn't need to. Morning crept in, slowly through the frost-lined windows of Cedar Creek Inn, throwing thin blades of light across the small guest room's wooden floor. Emily sat across from the man she had pulled out of the mud just hours before, watching him cradle a cup of tea in his weathered hands. His movements were careful, as though he'd spent the night not just recovering, but measuring everything: the space, her silence, his breath. He wore a borrowed flannel shirt and jeans she had tucked away in an old duffel for emergencies. Now, they clung to him like someone trying on an identity that didn't quite fit, cleaned up and alert. He didn't look like a drifter. His back was too straight, his eyes too knowing. There was an edge of formality to the way he sipped his tea, and even though he hadn't yet spoken much, his silence felt deliberate, not unsure. "I appreciate what you did," he said finally. His voice was low, calm, but carried weight. "You didn't have to help me. You didn't know who I was." Emily folded her arms, her voice steady. "I still don't." He nodded, set the mug down on the nightstand, and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Name's Jack Townsend." She blinked. It was a name with some weight in Cedar Creek. Townsend. It echoed in committee meetings, at charity dinners, in hospital brochures and real estate plaques. But that Jack Townsend was supposed to be dead. She didn't speak, but he noticed the shift in her expression. I know what you're thinking. And yes, Jack Townsend, the man who disappeared 6 months ago. That's me. Emily's pulse skipped. Her arms dropped to her sides. She'd seen a news segment about it. A presumed drowning. No body recovered. Rumors of foul play. Some said it was suicide. Others that it had been staged. She never gave it much thought until now. You faked your death. Jack didn't flinch. I didn't have a choice. People I trusted turned against me. My brother Michael, he was the one they were really after. He found something they didn't want made public. He ended up dead, and no one wanted to ask why. His voice cracked slightly, just once. Emily saw it like a splinter beneath the surface. Pain, held down too long. I tried going to the police. They shut it down, quietly, politely. Then came the threats. Anonymous, specific. I didn't see a way out, so I gave them what they wanted. A body that disappeared. A man who stopped asking questions. Emily felt herself leaning in, not just physically, but emotionally. Something in his tone stripped of pretense, not begging for pity, just laying it down, plain pulled at her. But skepticism tugged at the back of her mind. What if this was rehearsed? What if he'd pulled others into this story before Jack looked at her then? Really looked. You think I'm lying? I don't know what to think. I'm not asking you to trust me. Not yet. He paused. But I am asking you not to tell anyone I'm alive. Not until I know what I'm dealing with. Emily studied him, the furrow in his brow, the dark circles under his eyes. The man didn't seem dangerous. He seemed tired, haunted, determined. Before she could answer, the doorbell rang downstairs. Emily stood quickly. Jack straightened, instinctively reaching for the mug as if it could shield him. The two exchanged a glance, hers, tense, his unreadable. She moved toward the door, boots silent on the hallway's old rug, and looked through the peephole. A figure stood outside, shifting weight nervously. Not one of the men from the night before. A woman, trim coat, red scarf, clipboard pressed to her chest. She knocked again, a little louder this time. Jack appeared beside her, whispering low. That's Evelyn Ross. She used to work with me. I trust her. Mostly. Emily hesitated. You said not to tell anyone. He shook his head. She might already know. If she's here, she knows something. The bell rang a third time, sharper now. Jack stepped back into the room, leaving Emily standing alone in the hallway, one hand hovering over the knob. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. Emily didn't know what she expected when she opened the door to the small room at Cedar Creek Inn. But the face that met her gaze wasn't a stranger. It was Dr. Evelyn Ross, the retired chief of diagnostics at Redwood Falls Community Hospital. The woman's gray coat was damp from the morning mist. Her scarf twisted awkwardly at her throat, and there was something in her eyes that unsettled Emily. Something fragile. Emily Harper Evelyn asked, already stepping forward. I was told this was your room, but I didn't believe her eyes drifted past Emily into the room. When she saw Jack, seated upright now on the edge of the bed, her breath caught. Her hand flew to her chest. Jack, she whispered. Jack Townsend, you're alive. The words didn't hang in the air, they dropped like a weight. Emily turned to look at Jack. He stood slowly, his face unreadable. Hello, Evelyn, for a beat. Nothing moved. The rain outside pattered softly against the windows, a dull rhythm beneath the stunned silence. Then Evelyn stepped forward and, with both hands, reached out to touch his shoulder. They said you drowned, that you fell during the fire inspection at the docks, that your body was never recovered. Jack nodded once, his voice quiet but certain. That's what I let them say. Emily looked between the two, her heart pressing hard against her ribs. She had just begun to believe his story to let herself wonder if maybe his fear had roots. Now, with someone else confirming his identity, her questions turned sharper, deeper. "I don't understand," Emily said. "You let them think you died." Jack didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window and drew the curtain back, as if watching for something beyond the glass. "I didn't fake my death for myself," he said finally. "I did it because I needed to know the truth about what happened to Michael." At the name, Evelyn sat down. Her hands trembled, and she clasped them tightly in her lap. "I knew something wasn't right," she said, barely above a whisper. "After Michael passed, files went missing. Lab reports were altered. Victor pushed through approvals he had no business signing, but I couldn't prove anything. And after your disappearance..." Her voice trailed off. Jack turned to Emily, meeting her eyes. "Michael was my younger brother. He was a nurse practitioner, loyal, quiet, the kind of person who memorized patients' birthdays. He died suddenly. A seizure, they said. But there were irregularities in his last chart. When I brought it up, the records vanished. Then came the threats." Emily swallowed hard. "So you ran." "I disappeared. To watch from the outside, to collect what I could, but it's not enough. Not yet." The pieces were forming now. Emily could feel it, the picture sharpening. This wasn't just about one man hiding. It was about something broken in the center of the place she once trusted, the very hospital where her parents spent their last months. "I remember Michael," she said quietly. "He was kind. He held my father's hand when no one else would." Jack's face changed then. Something old and raw shifted behind his eyes. He never talked much about the patients, but he always said your father reminded him of our dad. Evelyn looked up sharply, startled by the coincidence. Emily nodded slowly. A knot inside her tightened and then released, just slightly. Then Evelyn's phone rang. All three froze. She pulled it from her coat pocket, glancing at the screen. The color drained from her face. "It's from the board line," she said. No name, just the number. She answered, voice stiff. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then her brows furrowed, her lips parted, but she said nothing. When she ended the call, she stared ahead, blinking. "We have to go," she said. "They know you're here." Jack stepped forward. "Who the hospital board?" she said, "or someone connected to them. They were monitoring my call logs. I think they traced me to this motel." Emily stood quickly. "Where can we go?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "My brother's lake cabin outside Alder Ridge. It's remote, and no one from town knows about it. We can lie low and plan." Jack moved to the dresser, grabbing the folded clothes Emily had set aside for him. "Then we go now." Emily hesitated only a second before heading to the door. But in that hesitation, she felt something new, less doubt, more gravity. She wasn't just helping a stranger anymore. She was stepping into a storm she hadn't seen coming. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. The wind outside whipped past the windows like it had something urgent to say. Inside Evelyn Ross's cottage, a modest brick home nestled on a quiet road just south of Redwood Falls Community Hospital. Everything felt tight, like the walls were holding their breath. Emily sat on the edge of the couch, damp hair clinging to her neck, hands still trembling from the drive. Jack paced slowly near the fireplace, his eyes drawn again and again to the window, as if expecting a truck to barrel through the yard. They'd left Cedar Creek Inn only minutes ahead of the pickup that had circled back. Emily had watched it in the rearview mirror, its headlights slithering like snakes behind them through the wet trees. Every corner she turned felt like a dare, but they'd made it. Now, the adrenaline had settled into something heavier. Evelyn returned from the back room with a thin manila folder pressed tightly in her hands. Her expression was clouded, part fear, part anger. "This," she said, laying it down on the table between them, "is all I could recover before they locked me out of the hospital's internal system." Jack stepped forward and opened the folder. Inside were only 3 pages. One was a scan of Michael Townsend's last medication record. Another, a nurse's handwritten shift note with 2 lines blacked out by a marker. The third was an interdepartmental memo dated just 2 days before Michael died. It was signed by Victor Hayes. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the memo. His eyes scanned the lines, and a muscle in his jaw tensed. "This isn't the full file. This is barely a scrap." "I know," Evelyn said. "The night you disappeared, I tried to access Michael's files again. They were gone, not archived, not restricted, deleted, completely erased from our system. I called IT. They said there was no log, which is impossible." Emily watched Jack closely. Something shifted in him, not panic, but something older, worn, like someone reliving the moment a home catches fire and realizing he's already standing in the ashes. "I trusted Victor," Jack said, quieter now. "He and I built that palliative program together. He was at my brother's funeral." Evelyn sat down, rubbing her forehead. "And now he's the interim medical director and sitting on the hospital board." The weight of that landed hard. Emily felt it too. Redwood Falls wasn't some anonymous urban hospital. It was the place people brought their parents to die with dignity. The place where volunteers handed out coffee to grieving daughters. A place that felt like it belonged to everyone. If corruption could take root there, what else had been hidden beneath the polished brochures and garden benches? Emily glanced at Jack. He hadn't spoken in over a minute, just stared at the memo with his eyes narrowed, his grip tightening. "Do you have anything else?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated. "There's one person who might still have access to the older logs. A lab technician named Grace Lynn. She's been there for 10 years. Quiet, careful. She flagged an anomaly once, back when Michael's toxicology report came through, but she backed off quickly, too quickly." Jack nodded once. "Then we talked to her." Before Evelyn could answer, her phone buzzed loudly on the table. They all jumped. She picked it up. No caller ID, just a blank screen. She answered anyway. "Dr. Ross speaking." No one spoke at first. Then a voice came through, low and clipped, male, unmistakably firm. "You need to stop, now, or we will." The call ended. Evelyn lowered the phone slowly. Her face had gone pale. Emily stood. "They're watching you." Evelyn gave a single nod. "And they know you're alive." "Jack, that call wasn't for me. It was for you." Jack walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just an inch. The street was quiet, empty, but his shoulders didn't relax. Emily stepped beside him. "What do we do now?" Jack didn't answer immediately. His fingers tapped once against the glass. Then, quietly, he said, "We stop hiding." He didn't look back, but she knew. Something had turned. The records room in Evelyn's office was dimly lit and smelled faintly of printer toner and disinfectant. The blinds were half closed, keeping most of the late afternoon sun out, but enough light filtered in to catch the dust dancing through the air like unsettled memories. Emily was on the floor, sorting through a collapsed box of old documents Evelyn had retrieved from a back shelf, one of the few places untouched by the hospital's recent digital purge. Jack stood near the cabinet, arms crossed, eyes scanning each paper Evelyn handed him with a stillness that felt more like control than calm. "I don't know what we're even looking for anymore," Emily muttered, placing a folder aside. "You said it yourself, if they've erased the data from the system. We won't find anything in triplicate. Paper forgets slower than people," Jack said quietly. Then a folder slipped from Emily's hand, its contents fanning out like a deck of worn cards. A single photo floated loose and landed face up. She reached for it without thinking, but the moment her fingers touched it, Jack had already dropped to one knee beside her. The picture was sun-bleached at the corners. 3 young men stood shoulder to shoulder on the lawn behind Redwood Falls Community Hospital. Jack in a blue button-down and khakis, Michael with his arms crossed, smiling with that steady calm Emily remembered, and Victor Hayes taller, one hand resting casually on Michael's shoulder, his expression sharp with pride. They looked like a team about to change the world. Jack said nothing for a long time. Then, without lifting his eyes from the photo, He spoke. We were fresh out of training. Evelyn had just nominated us for the Community Health Initiative. We swore right here on this property that we'd build something honest, something that belonged to the people. He handed the photo to Evelyn, who looked down and gave a small nod. That was the summer before the foundation grant came through, before politics got involved. Emily studied Jack's face, watching how his mouth held still, how his eyes didn't blink. Then, softly, he said, "I never thought Victor would be the one to hollow it out." Evelyn looked at him, her voice gentle. He didn't start that way. He was just faster to compromise. Jack gave a short breath through his nose. He sold Michael out for a title, a seat on the board, a future that was never his to steal. Emily opened her mouth to say something, anything but a knock startled them, not a polite one. Just two sharp raps, followed by the squeak of the door swinging inward. A man in a hospital security uniform stepped inside, stocky, mid-40s, with a clipboard in hand. He looked up, ready to ask something, and froze. His eyes met Jack's. Recognition hit like a slap. He dropped the clipboard. Jack stepped forward instinctively. Doug blinked rapidly, then shook his head like clearing smoke from his ears. You're dead." Emily stepped between them. "You need to close that door right now." Doug didn't move. Evelyn finally rose, calm but firm. "Doug, listen to me. Jack's not a threat, but if you go telling someone he's here, people will be in real danger, especially you." Doug looked at all three of them in turn, eyes wide with disbelief. His hand hovered near the radio, clipped to his hip. Jack raised one hand, slowly, not threatening. "Just open." "You've worked here long enough to know the cracks," Jack said. "You've seen things swept under rugs. This is bigger than me. And if you trust the wrong person with what you saw today, you won't be safe either." Doug's breath caught. He turned, walked out without another word, and pulled the door shut behind him. The three of them stood still. Jack turned to Evelyn. "We have to move faster. If Doug tells anyone, Victor will know, and we'll lose whatever's left." Emily looked down at the photo again, still lying on the floor. They had built something once. But now, all that remained was a promise they hadn't kept, and a truth they could no longer outrun. She didn't look back. But he knew something had shifted. The air in the small cafe on Main Street was thick with the scent of burnt espresso and maple syrup. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed in 20 years. Same chipped coffee mugs, same framed photo of the town parade from 1992. Emily sat at a corner booth, her fingers wrapped tight around a warm ceramic cup she hadn't sipped from. The world outside the window was bright but cold, sunlight bouncing off truck hoods and pickup beds. Inside, time felt stalled. She glanced at the door just as it opened. Sheriff Ryan Colby stepped in, nodding to the waitress behind the counter before scanning the room. He spotted her, adjusted his belt, and walked over with the weight of someone who never rushed unless it mattered. "Emily," he said, sliding into the booth opposite her. "You said it was urgent." She nodded. "It is." She didn't waste time. Within 5 minutes, she had walked him through the entire chain of events: Jack's sudden appearance, the erased hospital files, Evelyn's reluctant confirmation, and the photograph that had shattered any lingering doubts. Ryan didn't interrupt, but his expression darkened with each detail. His eyes narrowed at the mention of Victor Hayes. When she finally paused, her breath caught in her throat. "I know how it sounds," she said quietly. "But I believe him. Ryan. I believe Jack." The sheriff exhaled slowly, leaning back. "Victor Hayes," he murmured. "I've heard things over the years. Not much that could stick land swaps, quiet board deals, people who owed him favors. But this." He rubbed the back of his neck, the kind of gesture that meant what he wanted to say wasn't going to sit easy. "You're telling me he covered up Michael Townsend's death, and Jack faked his own to survive it." Emily nodded. Ryan stared out the window for a long moment, his jaw tight. Hell. Just then, his phone buzzed. He frowned, glanced at the screen, and picked up. His tone changed instantly. Colby. He listened for a moment, then stood. Are you sure? When another pause. Keep it quiet. I'll handle it. He ended the call and sat back down, slower this time. That was from the regional liaison office. He said, FBI just opened a preliminary file on Redwood Falls Community Hospital. Anonymous complaint filed last night. Includes allegations of fraud, cover-ups, and medical malpractice going back 3 years. Emily's chest lifted. As if for the first time in days, she'd remembered how to breathe. So someone's finally looking. Ryan gave a short nod. That's the good news. She heard the shift in his tone before he said it. Her fingers tensed again around the cup. And the bad news, they're looking into Jack too. He didn't say it to hurt her, but the words still hit hard. He faked a death. Emily. That's obstruction at the very least. And from their point of view, it's suspicious as hell. He was protecting himself, she said quickly. They were going to bury him like they buried Michael. I get it, Ryan said. But the law doesn't work on feelings. And once the Bureau starts turning stones, they won't care why he disappeared, only that he did. Emily sat back. Her mind spun with questions, all circling the same truth, even if Jack was innocent of everything else. This one act disappearing had changed the game. It had given Victor time, power, cover. And now it might cost Jack everything. Ryan softened. But listen, if what you're saying is true, and I believe parts of it are, then we need to get ahead of this. You, Jack, Evelyn, we need to talk to the right people before they come to us, before they control the narrative. Emily looked up. Are you saying you'll help? I'm saying... He replied, I don't trust Victor Hayes either. And if someone's finally brave enough to pull this mess into daylight, I'm not going to stand in their way. He finished his coffee in one long sip, tossed a 20 on the table, and stood. But be careful, Emily. There's a fine line between revealing the truth and becoming the target. As he walked away, Emily stared at the empty seat across from her, the sunlight now slanting across the table in a sharper line than before. She didn't move for a while, but when she finally did, she knew exactly where she needed to go. The sanctuary of Saint. Andrews had always carried a certain quietness that felt older than time. Its stone walls, worn smooth by years of prayer and silence, held stories of grief and healing alike. That night, the only light came from the brass sconces along the aisle, casting long shadows over the pews and altar. Outside, the town of Cedar Creek lay still under the cold blue dark of early winter, but inside, something was beginning to stir. Emily sat near the third pew, her coat still damp from the walk. Beside her, Evelyn watched the door as if expecting it to vanish behind them. Jack stood near the altar rail, unmoving. He hadn't spoken since they entered, not until the large wooden door at the back creaked open, and a familiar figure stepped quietly inside. Thomas, Jack said, voice soft but steady. Reverend Thomas Anderson, now in his 60s but still upright and sharp-eyed, nodded as he approached. He reached out, clasping Jack's hand with both of his. You look thinner, the Reverend said, but I know you're carrying more. I need to tell you something, Jack said, and I need you to hear it like you did when we were boys. The four of them sat near the altar, away from the front windows. The Reverend folded his hands in his lap, listening without interruption as Jack laid out what Michael had uncovered: altered invoices, false billing codes submitted to Medicaid, and payments routed through a shell foundation meant for hospice care, but instead used to purchase real estate in Victor's name and in the name of 2 other hospital board members. The tipping point came when Michael confronted Victor in private and was warned, gently but firmly, to focus on patients, not paperwork. Within 2 weeks, Michael was dead, his chart reading a cocktail of sedatives he hadn't been prescribed. Emily had heard pieces of this before, but the way Jack told it now with names, timestamps, the full emotional weight made it real in a way it hadn't been. She found herself pressing one palm to her chest as if to steady the rhythm beneath it. They used the hospital like a mask, Jack said. Everything looked clean on the surface community grants, new equipment, smiling press photos. But underneath, they siphoned money from the people who trusted them most. Michael found the thread, and they cut it. Evelyn sat forward, eyes glistening. "We need to go public." "We can't," Jack said. "Not yet. We don't have enough to prove a medical homicide, and if we go too soon, they'll bury us." Reverend Thomas looked long at Jack. "I baptized your brother in this room," he said quietly. "If even a fraction of what you say is true, this town's been living under a lie for years." "It has." The door creaked again. They all turned. Standing in the threshold was Victor Hayes. He wore a gray suit, the kind that looked tailored even under poor lighting, and his smile was faint but unmistakable. Behind him stood two hospital security men, one short and broad-shouldered, the other lean, stone-faced. Neither looked surprised to be there. "Well," Victor said, walking slowly down the aisle, "if it isn't the resurrection itself, and friends." He paused near the pew where Emily sat, glancing at her like an unwanted guest at his own party. "I thought I might find you here, Jack. Always did have a fondness for confessionals." Jack stood. Victor's voice remained casual, almost conversational. "You've made quite the mess. Evelyn's been missing from her desk. Emily's been asking questions. And now, here you are, speaking treason in a church." "It's not treason," Emily said sharply, standing too. "It's truth." Victor turned, smiling slightly. "Truth, Miss Harper, is a flexible thing, especially when you've been legally dead for 6 months." His tone dropped, quiet but sharp. "You should be careful who you stand beside." Jack stepped between them. "Is that a threat, Noah?" Victor said. "It's a reminder." He signaled to the guards. "Let's go." But before turning, he looked once more at the Reverend. "You used to bless our board meetings. Thomas, I hope you'll pray for wisdom now, because you're going to need it." He walked out, the door clicking shut behind them. Emily exhaled slowly. They all sat in silence for several moments, the sanctuary thick with the weight of what had just entered and what it had left behind. She didn't look back, but he knew something had begun to break loose. The wooden doors of St. Andrew's creaked open again, but this time the silence inside didn't soften the sound, it amplified it. Every footstep Victor Hayes took echoed like a deliberate strike. He walked down the aisle, not like a man entering a church, but like one walking into a negotiation he already knew he'd win. His coat was unbuttoned, his tie loosened just enough to suggest control, not carelessness. There was something almost performative in the way he moved, casual yet exact. Jack turned before anyone else, his back straightened, jaw locked. Emily stood beside him, her heartbeat quickening with every step Victor took. Victor stopped just short of the altar. His eyes swept the group like an appraisal, settling last on Jack with an expression that balanced between false sympathy and unveiled disdain. "Well," Victor said, his voice smooth and cold, "it's good to see you standing again. Jack, Cedar Creek was starting to forget your name." Jack didn't move. "I doubt that," he replied quietly. Victor smiled. "No, I suppose not. You always did have a flair for spectacle." His gaze flicked to Emily, then Evelyn, lingering just long enough to leave discomfort hanging in the air. "Dr. Ross," he said. Still playing the savior, Evelyn's expression didn't waver, but her hands clenched slightly in her lap. Victor turned his attention back to Jack, tone sharpening. "I came to offer you something resembling a warning. The FBI is building their case. You think you've started something noble here, some crusade to clear your name, but all it's doing is dragging your few remaining allies down with you." Jack stepped forward, slow and steady, until they were just feet apart. "You're afraid," he said, voice low but unwavering. "Afraid that Michael's death won't stay buried, that your lies are finally beginning to unravel." Victor didn't blink. "What I am, Jack, is prepared. You disappeared. You left a trail of fake documents and frightened people behind. You made yourself a myth. Now you want to come back and rewrite history. Good luck explaining that to the federal investigators. Emily couldn't stay quiet. You killed Michael, she said, words sharp with rising emotion. You orchestrated the entire thing and wrapped it in charity and policy meetings. And you think people won't see through it. Victor turned toward her, a smile twitching at the corner of his mouth. And you are, he asked, though he clearly already knew. I'm someone who doesn't buy masks made of polished words and clean suits, she said. Victor laughed softly, the sound without warmth. Jack, he said, turning back. I suggest you worry less about the past and more about what happens when this fairy tale falls apart, because it will, soon. He gave a curt nod, then turned and walked away, footsteps even, and unhurried. His security men followed, their silence more threatening than words. The heavy doors shut behind them, sealing in the chill they'd left behind. No one spoke at first. The light above the altar flickered once, briefly, as if the room itself had exhaled. Evelyn finally broke the silence. Her voice was quiet but clear. I think there's someone we haven't spoken to yet, someone who might still be willing to talk. Jack looked at her. She took a breath. Her name is Claire Bennett. She used to be Victor's private nurse, years ago, before all this got too big. You trust her? Emily asked. She left suddenly. No one ever said why, but she came to me once, after Michael's funeral, said something was wrong, but she was scared. Evelyn's eyes dropped. I brushed it off. I shouldn't have. Jack nodded slowly. Then we find her. For the first time since Victor had walked in, there was clarity in the room, sharp and tangible. They weren't just reacting now. They had a name, a direction, a piece that hadn't yet been played. Emily looked toward the doors Victor had just exited through, her chest still tight but her resolve beginning to steady. He walked out like the chapter was finished, but something about tonight had shifted. The gallery sat quietly on a corner in downtown Helena, Montana, where late afternoon sun filtered through tall glass windows, scattering gold over polished wood floors and the abstract paintings lining the walls. It was the kind of place no one would expect secrets to surface too still, too curated. Emily adjusted the scarf around her neck as she glanced once more at the front door, her fingers twitching on the worn leather strap of her bag. Jack, sitting beside her on a deep green velvet bench, seemed oddly calm, though the lines around his mouth had deepened. The door opened. A woman in her early 50s stepped in, brown hair pinned loosely, coat slightly oversized, as if she wanted to disappear inside it. Sarah Nolan looked like she hadn't slept well in years. Her eyes darted toward Emily and Jack. Emily stood, offering a soft smile. You're safe here, she said gently. Thank you for coming. Sarah nodded but didn't speak at first. She glanced around the empty gallery, eyes lingering briefly on a portrait of a man silhouetted against a winter sky, then sat across from them, folding her hands tightly in her lap. I don't have long, she said, voice barely above a whisper, and I don't know if this will be enough. Jack leaned forward, his gaze steady but kind. Whatever you have, Sarah. It matters. She looked up, eyes full of years she hadn't been allowed to speak. The night Michael died, I was on shift. I saw Victor and 2 board members in his room. They said it was just to check on him, but later, when I went back to file meds, the records had changed. Dosage increased. Wrong chart. I knew they'd made a mistake, and I knew they were covering it. Emily felt the cold press against her ribs, even in the warm gallery light. You didn't report it I wanted to, Sarah said, voice cracking. But when I brought it up to the floor supervisor, she said I'd misunderstood. 2 days later, I was transferred without warning, then threatened with a lawsuit for breaching protocol. They knew I'd seen too much. Silence settled like a weight between them. Then, with trembling hands, Sarah reached into her coat and pulled out a small flash drive. I recorded one of their meetings. Not the whole thing, just enough to prove they altered the charts. Enough to show that Michael didn't just die. He was silenced. Jack took the drive, his hand steady despite the tremor in his jaw. You've done more than enough, Sarah. You've given him dignity back. Emily reached across and took Sarah's hand. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. We'll protect you. We'll make it count. For a moment, Sarah looked as though she might cry, but she didn't. She just nodded once, firmly, like someone who had been waiting too long to hand off a burden that had burned through her chest for years. Then Jack's phone rang. He stared at the screen for a moment, expression darkening. He answered. Ryan. The pause on the other end told them everything. They've issued a statewide warrant, Ryan said. Jack, you're officially listed as a fugitive, fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy to commit medical sabotage. Victor moved fast. Jack stood slowly, eyes hardening, so he's ready to destroy everything to protect himself. Emily looked at Sarah, then back at Jack. What do we do now? Jack didn't answer immediately. He stared out the gallery window, watching the shadows shift across the street, like a line had just been drawn between what had been quiet resistance and open war. The headlights carved two faint tunnels of light through the dark Montana highway. Pines stood like sentinels on either side, silent and watching. Emily leaned forward over the wheel, squinting into the stretch of road ahead, her knuckles tight and pale. Jack hadn't spoken in miles. He wasn't asleep, just somewhere else, tucked behind the stillness in his jaw, eyes lost outside the window. It was the kind of silence that didn't need breaking. But she broke it anyway. Jack, she said gently, not turning her head. Whatever they say, whatever they're trying to twist, I believe you. We'll prove it. We'll clear Michael's name. Jack didn't answer at first. His fingers were curled around his knee, tense. Then slowly, almost hoarsely, he muttered, You know what the worst part is? It's not being hunted. It's realizing the very system I helped build is now being used to bury me. Emily glanced at him, then back at the road. Systems break, she said, but people don't have to. You're still here. You're still fighting. The ranch lights shimmered faintly in the distance, a soft glow against the tree line. But as they pulled closer, something shifted in Emily's chest. There, near the barn, wasn't that a car, a silver SUV, parked at an angle, not one she recognized. No dirt on the tires, still warm, likely not there more than half an hour. She reached slowly under her seat, feeling for the heavy flashlight she kept there. Jack had already stepped out, scanning the shadows around the front porch, his back tense and cautious. Then the porch light flicked on. The front door opened. Ryan Colby stood there, arms folded over his badge, hat in his hand. No weapon drawn. Just that look he always wore after a hard shift. Not guilty, not proud, just tired. Jack didn't flinch. You should have knocked. Ryan gave a half smile, soft as a sigh. Didn't think you'd answer. Inside the ranch house, the air was familiar wood smoke, pine cleaner, the faint scent of Emily's scarf on the coat rack. The photo of Michael still hung above the stone fireplace, framed in cedar. But now Ryan sat on the old recliner by the window, leaning forward like he'd been waiting for years. He didn't waste time. I sent the tip to the FBI, he said quietly. The one that reopened the hospital audit. That was me. Jack stared at him. Emily's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ryan continued, voice low but steady. Victor's too insulated. Lawyers, friends in every committee. I couldn't reach him from inside the department without tipping my hand, so I made it look like I was still on the fence. That's why I filed the statewide alert for your arrest myself. You turned me into a fugitive, Jack said, barely above a whisper. I made you bait, Ryan replied, without flinching. It was the only way to make Victor feel untouchable again. Get him careless. And it worked. He stopped watching me. Emily stepped closer, trying to piece the timeline. But the FBI, how do we know they'll follow the trail far enough? What if they stop at Jack? Ryan nodded. They will, unless we hand them something that forces their hand. The recording Sarah gave you, the timeline, the dosage logs, all of it has to go to the lead agent directly. If we go through channels, Victor will intercept it. Jack sat down slowly at the edge of the coffee table, head in his hands. So what now? Ryan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We split up. You two stay off grid. Let them believe you're hiding. Meanwhile, Emily and I will deliver the file to Agent Keller tomorrow morning in Missoula. One chance. If this fails. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the porch swing softly. The night seemed to lean in closer, listening. Jack didn't look up, but he nodded once, slow and deliberate. I trusted the wrong people before, he said. Let's hope this time I've got it right. The air felt heavier than usual that morning. Emily stood for a moment outside the sliding glass doors of Redwood Falls Community Hospital, the place where everything began and where it might all come to an end. She straightened her coat, adjusted the thin scarf around her neck, and stepped inside. The quiet was immediate. Nurses froze mid-step. A man pushing a mop along the hallway stopped, letting the wet floor glisten beneath untouched wheels. A receptionist lowered her coffee cup mid-sip. All eyes turned toward her. She wasn't just a visitor anymore. She was a disruption to the narrative people had already chosen to believe. Her footsteps echoed across the tile, like slow drums rolling in a courtroom. At the far end of the main atrium, a crowd had gathered. Cameras stood poised, lights harsh and artificial. Victor Hayes stood before the microphones, wearing a dark suit and his favorite red tie, the same one he'd worn the day of Michael's memorial. His voice was amplified and smooth, measured like a man who had rehearsed every word. Dr. Jack Townsend, once trusted by this hospital, staged his own death and betrayed our community. Victor declared, "Face grave. We will not let deception define our mission. We will rebuild." Emily pushed through the crowd, ignoring the startled faces, the murmurs, the sharp glances. She stopped just yards from the podium, her presence slicing the room open. "Victor," she said clearly, "would you like to explain why Michael's patient file was altered the night he died?" The room fell silent. Even the clicking shutters paused. Victor blinked. "Ms. Carter, now's not the time." "It is," she interrupted, steady. "The people deserve the truth." She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a flash drive, and raised her voice. "I have a recording one made the night Michael Townsend died. It captures your voice, and others. It proves what really happened in that hospital room." Gasps rippled through the room. A few people exchanged alarmed looks. Victor's face didn't move at first. He simply stared at her, stunned, but a muscle in his jaw began to twitch. Emily walked to the AV technician near the stage. The young man hesitated, looking up at Victor, but Victor said nothing. The screen behind the stage flickered to life. The audio began, crackly at first, then voices clear, undeniable. "We can't let that chart get out. Victor, it'll trace back to the order. We change the file, adjust dosage, say he reacted poorly. Nobody questions a side effect." A collective breath held. Victor's face drained of color, his lips parted, but no sound came. Then just as the silence threatened to break into chaos, the double doors at the back of the room swung open. Two officers in uniform walked in, shoulders squared, eyes set on Emily. Emily Carter, one of them asked, loud and firm. "You're under investigation for aiding a fugitive. We have a warrant to bring you in for questioning." The shift was instant. The crowd recoiled. Some whispered her name. Others stepped back like guilt might be contagious. Victor didn't speak. He didn't have to. The spectacle was his shield now. Emily lifted her hands without protest. She looked over the crowd once more, her chin held high even as the cold steel of the cuffs clicked around her wrists. As she was led down the aisle, past the people who had once worked beside her, cared for patients beside her, she caught one familiar gaze. Jack. He stood just beyond the glass doors, still, watching her. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. The courtroom in Cedar Creek County Courthouse buzzed like a beehive, barely holding its shape. Every seat was taken, and more people stood at the back, murmuring, shuffling, exchanging theories in hushed tones. the kind of public interest that only scandal and betrayal could bring. Emily sat quietly at the defense table, hands clasped in her lap. Her lawyer, a seasoned woman named Carol Brewer, reviewed documents one last time, whispering strategies Emily could barely hear. Her pulse was pounding too loud. Across the room, Jack sat in the second row, hat pulled low over his brow, coat collar turned up. It didn't matter much. People were more interested in the accused woman sitting before them than the quiet man hiding in plain sight. The judge, stern and composed, called the session into order. The bailiff announced charges. Victor Hayes took the stand with the ease of someone used to authority. He spoke with poise, weaving a narrative that painted Jack as a delusional fraud and Emily as his misguided accomplice. He played the concerned executive, the betrayed colleague, the man holding the hospital together through chaos. Emily listened, fists clenched beneath the table. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside, it felt like a slow, burning collapse. Every word Victor spoke chipped away at the truth she'd fought to hold upright. She could sense the courtroom shifting with him, some people leaning forward, nodding slightly, others whispering questions she couldn't answer. Then the courtroom doors creaked open. The noise was quiet, but it sliced through the tension like a blade. Heads turned. A woman entered slowly, face pale, hands trembling slightly, but her gaze was steady. Sarah Nolan. Emily's breath caught. The judge raised a brow. "May I ask who you are?" "Ma'am, I'm Sarah Nolan," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I have testimony and evidence that I believe this court needs to hear." Brewer stood. "Your Honor, we request to reopen the witness list and allow Ms. Nolan to testify. Her statement is material and newly available." The judge studied Sarah, then nodded once. "Proceed." Sarah approached the stand like someone walking toward the edge of a cliff, but determined to jump. She swore in, took a breath, and began. "I was a nurse under Mr. Hayes' supervision for 6 years. On the night Dr. Michael Townsend died, I witnessed the unauthorized alteration of his medical records. I heard Victor Hayes and 2 others discuss changing his dosage chart after he'd already passed. I recorded part of that conversation out of fear and out of guilt." The courtroom exploded. People stood. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, but the chaos had already burst free. Victor stood up, red-faced, his voice rising above the noise. "She's lying. This is a setup. This woman was fired for negligence. She's trying to save her own skin, but the mask had cracked. The judge demanded order. The bailiff intervened, and Victor was told to sit down or be removed from court. His hands trembled as he dropped into his chair, eyes darting. Sarah looked over at Emily once, a quiet nod between them that carried more weight than words. The session adjourned for the day, but no one left unchanged. The tide had shifted. Emily stepped out of the courthouse with Carol beside her and Jack trailing close behind. Her chest rose and fell like someone who just surfaced from deep water. She allowed herself the briefest smile, and then her phone buzzed. A call from a blocked number. She hesitated, answered. A voice on the other end said, "Is this Emily Carter? I'm calling from Redwood Falls General. Evelyn Ross has just been admitted after a motor vehicle collision. It appears suspicious." The world seemed to stop. Jack took a step forward, sensing the change in her posture. Emily lowered the phone slowly, her voice low, thin. "It's Evelyn. She's been in an accident, and something's not right." The quiet of Redwood Falls Community Hospital wrapped around the night like a fog no one could see through. Emily stepped out of the elevator first, the smell of antiseptic thick in her nose. Jack followed close behind, his shoulders hunched, eyes scanning every hallway corner as if expecting someone to leap from the shadows. Neither of them spoke. They reached the intensive care unit, room 203. Evelyn lay motionless under the pale light, wires and monitors blinking in dull rhythms. Her face, once firm and quick to smile, now looked shrunken under layers of fatigue and sedation. Emily walked over and placed her hand over Evelyn's. "It was cold. I shouldn't have let her get involved this deep," she whispered, her throat tight, She believed in me when no one else did." Jack didn't answer. He stood near the door, one hand resting on the frame. His jaw tensed. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the slow beep of the monitor, and then footsteps. They turned at once. Victor Hayes entered with the unshakable air of someone who believed the walls still bent around his name. His suit was immaculate, his expression sharp with satisfaction. He didn't look at Evelyn. His eyes locked on Emily and Jack. "You two just can't stop," he said, voice smooth and venomous. "Even now, standing beside a woman nearly killed in a crash you dragged her into." Emily stood up slowly. "You did this." Victor's smile didn't fade. "You have no proof. You keep saying that," Jack said, voice low. "But I think you know better by now." Victor stepped closer, his tone hardening. "You're a fraud, a liar, a man who faked his death and dragged others into your paranoia. You're not just going to prison. Jack, you're going to be forgotten." Jack took a step forward. His fists were clenched, but his voice stayed steady. "If I'm forgotten, then at least it won't be for burying the truth under luxury condos and private accounts." Victor's jaw twitched. The door opened again, this time with force. 2 officers entered, behind them, Ryan Colby. Victor turned. "What's this?" Ryan stepped into the light. "FBI just confirmed it. The warrant's live. You and your boardroom thieves are done." Victor froze. Emily's breath hitched as one of the officers moved toward Victor. But just as the cuffs came out, Victor reached into the inside of his jacket and pulled something small and black. A gun. Gasps exploded. A nurse screamed from down the hallway. One of the officers stepped back with a shout, a hand on his own holster, but too far to act in time. Victor's hand trembled slightly as he pointed the weapon straight at Jack's chest. For the first time, his eyes flickered not with control, but desperation. "You think you've won," Victor hissed, voice cracking at the edges. "You think you get to walk out of this, and I don't." Jack didn't move. Emily stepped forward instinctively. "Victor, don't." He didn't respond. The air in the room collapsed. A breath, a blink, a moment between silence and decision. Every person in that hallway held still between mercy and ruin, between truth and madness. And Jack, standing there, did not flinch. The beeping from Evelyn's monitor echoed louder now, each beat suspended, waiting to be broken. The air inside the ICU hung thick with tension, as if even the walls held their breath. Victor's hand trembled, the muzzle of the gun hovering between rage and regret. Jack stood still, eyes locked on the man who once called himself a mentor. Across the room, a nurse ducked behind a monitor cart. An officer edged sideways, but no one dared move too fast. And then Emily stepped forward. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. Her voice was steady, quiet, yet sharp enough to cut through the fear. "Victor," she said, standing between him and Jack, "you don't have to let it end like this." Victor's eyes twitched, his mouth opened, then closed again. The mask of control was cracking. "You think this fixes anything? You think the truth matters in a world like this?" "It does to me," Emily said, soft but unwavering. "And it still can for you. Just stop." She held his gaze. For one long moment, the only sound in the room was Evelyn's heart monitor, steady, faint, alive. Victor's hand dropped a fraction, then another. The gun lowered slowly, his shoulders sagging. When the officers finally moved in, he didn't resist. They took the weapon, cuffed him, walked him out under the stark lights. No one said a word. Emily turned toward the bed. Evelyn had stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips parting, as though waking from a long and complicated dream. Jack leaned close, and her voice came out cracked but clear. "I heard it all." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. "You're safe now. It's over." Evelyn gave the faintest smile. Then she spoke again, more forcefully. It was him. "Victor. He drove me off the road. I saw his car. He was trying to silence me." The officers exchanged glances. One of them stepped outside with a radio already in hand. The second officer nodded slowly, already taking her statement seriously. Jack gripped the edge of the bed. Evelyn turned her head slightly toward him. "Michael would be proud of you," she said. "You stood where he couldn't. You stayed when it got dark." He didn't answer. Couldn't. He only nodded, jaw clenched, tears threatening to fall. Emily placed her hand on his. Their fingers laced together without effort. It wasn't triumph in that moment, just breath, just the truth allowed to live in the light. The next morning, Redwood Falls felt different. It started with whispers, then headlines, then phone calls. By noon, the hospital lobby was filled with reporters, patients, nurses, all talking about the man they once believed had disappeared in shame. Jack Townsend, not a fraud, not a coward, a brother, a whistleblower, a survivor. The tide had turned so swiftly it felt unreal. Yet Jack moved through it with quiet clarity, not letting the attention confuse him. He knew what had to be done next. Later that afternoon, he stood by the stone fountain in the hospital courtyard, where staff had hastily arranged a memorial table for Michael Townsend, once ignored, now finally seen. Emily stood beside him, arms crossed in front of her, eyes wet. A nurse lit a single white candle. Patients gathered, silent. Jack stepped forward. He cleared his throat, eyes sweeping the crowd. "I wasn't supposed to speak today," he began, voice low but steady. "But I need to. Not for myself. For Michael." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the photo Sarah Nolan had given him days earlier. Michael, smiling in front of the original patient care center. Jack held it up for all to see. "My brother warned them. He saw what was coming, and they buried him. They buried the truth with him. But not anymore." He turned to the plaque behind him. Michael's name had been freshly engraved, no longer footnoted in shame. And as the crowd bowed their heads, Jack stood tall, not as a man finally proven right, but as someone who had survived being misunderstood. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Because across the fountain, through the crowd, he saw something change in their faces. Not pity, not doubt, recognition. He stepped back beside Emily. She didn't say anything, but her hand found his. And as the wind passed gently between them, Jack knew this wasn't the end. It was the first day he didn't have to run. The sun broke through the late spring clouds above Redwood Falls, casting a soft light across the newly polished brass plaque at the hospital's entrance, where once it had read Redwood Falls Community Hospital. Now it gleamed with a new name, Michael Townsend Healing Center. A gesture, yes, but not a small one. Not to those who had watched the battle unfold. Not to those who had been silent when silence was easiest. Inside the auditorium, every seat was taken. Staff in white coats sat beside patients in wheelchairs. Families who had once turned their backs now sat with folded hands and solemn expressions. At the front of the room, Jack Townsend stood alone at the podium. He didn't wear a suit, just a clean button-down, sleeves rolled at the wrist. No pretense, no armor. "I know many of you still have questions," he began, his voice low, carrying not just through the room, but through every chest in it. "And I don't blame you." He paused, glanced down at the paper in his hand, then folded it and set it aside. "I disappeared because I had to. I couldn't breathe in a world that let my brother die and then pretended it was his fault. I walked away from my name, my job, my dignity, not because I was guilty, but because the truth didn't have a place here. Not yet." A hush fell over the room, like even the air had leaned forward. But truth has a way of returning, of waiting until we're ready to hold it. His eyes moved toward the front row. Evelyn Ross sat there in a wheelchair, wrapped in a navy shawl, her hands folded in her lap. She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable but alive with something quiet and proud. "Michael was the better man," Jack said, his voice catching only once. "He fought harder, saw clearer, and I failed him. Not just in that hospital room, but in the years I let fear decide who I was going to be." He took a breath, let it settle in his lungs. "I'm standing here today because Emily didn't walk away, because Evelyn risked her life, because Ryan Colby refused to play along. I'm here because Redwood Falls decided, maybe for the first time in a long time, that the truth mattered more than comfort. His voice softened, almost to a whisper, and for that, I thank you. For my brother, and for the man I'm still trying to become. The room didn't erupt. There was no thunder of applause, just a silence so full it pulsed. Then, slowly, a hand clapped, then another, until it rose like a tide, not loud, but real. Jack stepped back. Emily joined him, her heels clicking lightly across the stage floor. She didn't take the mic, didn't say a word. She just took his hand in hers and turned toward the door. Her shoulders were back, chin lifted, eyes ahead. And as they walked down the aisle, the crowd didn't part like they had for VIPs. They stood to meet them nurses, former skeptics, patients with tears in their eyes. Outside, the wind was gentle, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers from the hills beyond town. Jack and Emily paused at the steps. For the first time in months, maybe years, there was no chase, no shadow behind them, just a road forward. He looked at her. She smiled, not the smile of someone who had won, the smile of someone who had stayed. And in that quiet moment, with the brass letters shining behind them and the world finally listening, Jack knew something he hadn't allowed himself to believe until now. They weren't just free, they were home. The hospital courtyard was quiet that morning, just the hush of wind through cottonwoods and a paper cup of coffee gone cold on a bench someone didn't want to leave. No speeches, no music, just the kind of peace that arrives when the worst has already happened and someone still chooses to stay. Maybe that's what trust looks like, not loud, not quick, but steady enough to return after everything. And maybe the real question isn't who we used to be, but who we become once we've been seen.